Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's Object Talk. My name is Emma, and I am the Engagement Officer at the Jewish Museum, London. This month, across the museum, our theme is freedom. This is a really important concept and is found within our collection in many different forms. Some objects represent a desire to be free from danger, to be free from harm. Others represent a desire to be free from discrimination or anti-Semitism. Some show a desire to be free to live as openly Jewish, and others reflect the freedom to make choices and to start a new and a better life. Recently, we finished celebrating the festival of Passover. The theme of freedom is really strong in this festival, as Moses led the Jewish people to freedom from slavery in Egypt. However, as well as Moses leading the people, there was another individual in there as well. It was Miriam. Throughout history, women have also played a key role in fighting for freedom, both for themselves and also for their community. And Miriam is a strong and brave character within the Passover story. I would like to share an object from our collection that depicts Miriam to reflect on the theme of freedom. I wanted to choose this object because there are actually very few objects in our collection that depict Miriam, despite what an important person she is within the Torah. Now, while she is mentioned in the Torah is never illustrated. Synagogues do not tend to be decorated with illustrations of figures from the Torah, and items of Judaica in our collection do not always have illustrations of people on them. So this in part explains why she features on so few of our 40,000 objects. However, whilst illustrations of Miriam are rare, illustrations of her brothers, Moses and Aaron, feature on quite a large number of objects in our collection, and some of these objects quite large themselves. Here we have a beautiful painting that is currently on display by the entrance to our Judaism gallery. It depicts Moses and Aaron on either side of the stone tablets that display the 10 Commandments. Artificially lighting the colours for us here, we can make out the details a bit more clearly. We can recognise Moses standing on our left and Aaron standing on our right. This image of the two brothers on either side of the 10 Commandments is relatively common in Jewish art and features multiple times within our collection. However, one of their siblings is absent. It is, of course, Miriam. Even Seder plates that are used during the Seder meal to tell the Passover story rarely depict Miriam on them. I'd like to show you an exception to this rule. This Passover plate is beautifully decorated with many different scenes and images that tell different stories. Starting at the top, running along the top in a semicircle are the circular discs. You may be able to picture some have animals on them, one has a boat. We can see a close-up of some of them here. These different discs each represent a different one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And underneath them is another semicircle, now showing illustrations of those sons. There is a large image of Moses over on the right-hand side carrying the 10 Commandments, and over on the left, his brother Aaron, dressed in a similar way as the painting we looked at earlier. At the bottom, we have an illustration of Moses leading the Israelites to freedom across the Red Sea, freedom being such a key theme. But where is Miriam? Miriam was definitely there, leading the people across the Red Sea, but she's not included in this section of the plate. And in fact, all the Israelites seem to be depicted as male. So where is she on this Seder plate? We can see her here in this smaller illustration. This shows Moses in a basket being discovered by Pharaoh's daughter. We can believe that Miriam is over on the right-hand side here, watching what is occurring. So where is this image on the plate as a whole? I mentioned it was a smaller image compared to the one of Moses and Aaron. We can see it's just down here in the center on top of the large bird. That is where Miriam features on this plate. Let's turn back to the bookmark where we can see Miriam a little bit larger and in more detail. I mentioned that the theme of freedom is incredibly important to the Passover story, as well as the quite dramatic sense of freedom where the Israelites cross the Red Sea that parts for them to physically journey towards freedom. Earlier in the story, we see the idea of freedom in another form. The freedom to be able to save a baby, the freedom to live on a much more individual level. Moses' mother, Jochebed, hides him in a basket and places him at the edges of the Nile. Miriam hides in the bulrushes to see what happens. This is the scene that we can see here. And let's look at it in closer detail. I find it very interesting the way that Miriam is depicted. She has one hand pushing the bulrushes apart to peer through, and the other raised to her head. Whilst Miriam was a child at this point, it does not seem to depict a scared child cowering amongst the bulrushes or trying to stay hidden, aware of the risky situation she is in. Her expression intrigues me. Instead, she looks defiant, watchful, perhaps even slightly frustrated with the situation. In comparison, Moses, at the bottom of our screens now, seems blissfully unaware of what is happening and reasonably content. It is Miriam who is tasked with this difficult job. What occurs next is the discovery of Moses by Pharaoh's daughter, as shown in the scene on the Seder plate. In the Torah, both Miriam and Pharaoh's daughter, Batya, are given dialogue. Now, I've not been able to find statistics for the Torah or Tanakh, but in the Christian Bible, which contains the Tanakh, apparently I found on a Google search that women's speech makes up just 1% of the text. Despite the pivotal actions of Jochebed, Moses' mother, she doesn't actually speak at all. Yet, in the Passover story, Miriam does speak, and not just speak as a woman, she speaks as a child, as a girl, making it even rarer. And her conversation is with another woman, Batya, Pharaoh's daughter, although neither of the women or Jochebed have been named by this part in the story. Through her speech, Miriam shows herself as quick-witted, quick-thinking, arranging that Jochebed can nurse her own son safely, that he has the freedom to live. An incredible achievement and a really important part of the Passover story. He is free to live, to go on to lead the Israelites to freedom. Whilst both illustrations show Miriam as a child watching over her brother, her story does not end there. She is a leader of the Jewish people. She has a key role in leading them to freedom out of slavery in Egypt, along with her brothers Moses and Aaron. The Torah refers to her as Miriam the prophetess, and the Talmud names her as one of the 7 major female prophets. Miriam leads the Jewish people in praise as they cross the Red Sea, and this passage of the Torah can be translated to: Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and rider he has hurled into the sea." She is later referred to as a leader God has sent to lead the Jewish people to freedom. In the Tanakh it says, "I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam." Miriam is given as much prominence as her brother Aaron. Miriam continued to play an important role in the community until her death, and she continues to inspire Jewish women and men to this day. Let's turn our attention back to this bookmark that depicts Miriam. This bookmark commemorates the Hebrew Ladies' Bazaar in 1875. This was a fundraising initiative established by the Jewish women of Sydney, Australia, in order to raise money to contribute to the Great Synagogue Building Fund. The first Jewish community in Sydney is dated to 1832, although there were Jewish individuals in Australia before then. However, this community did not have a synagogue, but were meeting together in their homes. This bookmark has writing on the top that reads, "In commemoration of the testimonial to Sir Moses Montefiore in 1875. This was a charitable fund to raise money for the Jewish community in South Australia to build a new synagogue. Their community was growing to such an extent that they wanted a place where they could gather together." So, why were so many people migrating to Australia? Why were they settling in Sydney? Many people were migrating in the hope of a better life, as well as migrating for economic reasons, and so the freedom to start a better life. Australia also had relatively low levels of anti Semitism, especially compared to the situation in Europe at that time. By travelling there, by migrating there, Jewish people were also seeking freedom of another type, the freedom to live free from discrimination, the freedom to have the same rights as other people, regardless of their Jewish faith and heritage. An important freedom, and the freedom of an expression of faith is very important, and having dedicated places of worship is also key to a community being able to thrive. And the women of the community played a key role in getting this freedom, in financing this synagogue, because they played a key role in the fundraising, as shown by this bookmark. The Hebrew Ladies' Bazaar that this bookmark commemorates was held in December 1875, where women handmade items to sell to raise money. This included clothing, embroidery, jewellery, and toys. Over 10,000 people visited the bazaar, and it raised almost £5,000. Bookmarks such as this were made specifically for the event. I find the choice of the image for their commemorative bookmark an interesting one. Miriam stands behind her brother, half hidden. At this point in the story, she's not been given a name, but is referred to by her relation to the male character, his sister. The women behind this bazaar have largely been lost to history. We do know the names of some. We know the committee president was Blanche Davis, the treasurer, Bessie Hoffman, the honorary secretary, Jenny Cohen, but there must have been many, many more women who were involved in this event, who raised money for the first purpose-built synagogue in Sydney. Yet even without their names, we can still see the legacy that they had, the legacy of the Great Synagogue in Sydney. The earliest surviving synagogue still in use today in New South Wales. We may not know their names, but we can see their contribution and their legacy. This month at the Jewish Museum, we are celebrating all the objects in our collection that tell a story of freedom in many different forms. This bookmark tells of different forms of freedom. It reminds us of the Jewish people finding freedom through Miriam, Moses, and Aaron leading them across the Red Sea and out of Egypt. It also represents the freedom that people sought by migrating to Australia, to Sydney, and the freedom they desired to worship freely in their own purpose-built synagogue. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's talk. Do join us again next week for another talk on the theme of freedom. We will see you there.